This bizarre story happened to two friends named Zhang and Li. They rented an apartment together to share living expenses. Zhang was messy by nature. He often dumped leftover food into the toilet. One day, when Li was about to use the restroom, he opened the toilet lid and found it completely clogged with smelly food waste. Li was extremely upset and immediately went outside to confront Zhang. Seeing Li's irritated expression, Zhang nonchalantly replied that if the toilet was clogged, he should just find a pipe to unclog it. Li pointed at the trash can nearby and nearly shouted in Zhang's face, "Can't you just throw your leftovers in the trash?" This wasn't the first time the toilet had been blocked, but Zhang remained indifferent, waving his hand as if shooing away a fly. To him, this was just a trivial matter, not worth fussing over. With that, Zhang casually picked up a container of leftover food still sitting on the table. The trash can next to him had its lid open as if waiting for the garbage, but Zhang didn't even glance at it. He walked straight toward the bathroom, taking slow and indifferent steps, as if carrying out a routine task. Then, to Li's astonishment, Zhang poured all the food into the already clogged toilet, which was full of previous leftovers. At this point, Li couldn't take it anymore. He growled at Zhang, "It's already this clogged and you're still dumping more in?" With a defiant attitude, Zhang glared at Li and said that if Li kept nagging, he would dump food in there every day. All kinds of stuff, until Li got so disgusted he'd want to die. Li trembled with rage. All he could do was grit his teeth and curse the rude, despicable man standing before him. Zhang, as if he had just won a battle, waved mockingly at Li with a smirk, then casually left the house, ignoring Li's seething fury. After the door slammed shut, Li was livid. He asked himself how he had ended up living with someone like that. Fuming, he angrily kicked the clogged toilet and swore he'd move out the very next day. Suddenly, the waste in the toilet seemed to clear, flushing away smoothly, leaving only swirling water. Li was startled. Could a single kick have unclogged it? That didn't make sense. He walked over and looked inside. Strangely, the water level in the bowl had also dropped to only half its usual level. Noticing something black clinging to the inside of the toilet bowl, he leaned in for a closer look. Li's spine turned cold. He instinctively stepped back, heart pounding. Never in his life had Li seen a creature so grotesque. It looked like a mix of garbage, rotting meat, and some slimy living thing. He tried to calm himself, took a deep breath, and decided to take a closer look to figure out what the hell it was. Step by step, he cautiously approached, eyes nervously fixed on the toilet bowl. And this time, it was even more surprising. The toilet was now completely clean, as if it had never been clogged. Li immediately called a plumber and described the strange event he had just experienced. The old man seemed to be quite experienced. After listening to Li's story, he didn't appear surprised or frightened. He calmly said he needed to inspect the scene. He lifted the toilet lid. Li, standing beside him, shivered unintentionally. However, the toilet was spotless. There was nothing strange inside. The creature had vanished. Li stammered. He was sure he had just seen a bizarre creature. It was slimy, with many tiny mouths. Each mouth had long, stretching tentacles, and it was utterly disgusting. The plumber seemed to get the idea. This wasn't the first time he had heard of such a thing. However, he found it strange because they had never appeared in toilets before. He added that these creatures usually reside in sewers and survive by eating leftover food dumped by humans. Looking skeptical, he asked if Li often dumped leftovers into the toilet. Still bitter about earlier, Lee gritted his teeth and said that his roommate Zhang did it all the time. The old plumber patted Lee's shoulder to reassure him. He now had a general understanding of the situation. He said these creatures, once they stayed in a place long enough, would develop stronger urges and could even become dangerous to humans. However, based on Lee's description, they were not yet fully mature. His company had special chemicals to deal with them. He handed Lee a slip of paper with a phone number, telling him to call immediately if needed, as the creatures could pose a threat. He said he needed to return to his company to prepare the chemicals and would bring them over as soon as he was done. Before leaving, the repairman carefully warned Lee never to throw leftover food into the toilet again so that they wouldn't have a chance to grow. Lee felt more at ease now. He promised to follow the repairman's instructions. After saying goodbye, Lee let out a relieved sigh. Now, he just had to wait for the repairman to return and get rid of those disgusting creatures. However, a strange thought suddenly crossed his mind. The corners of Lee's mouth curled up into a sinister smile. He stepped outside, heading toward the kitchen. It seemed he had just come to a scheme. He opened the fridge and took out a full plate of food. Then, he turned toward the bathroom, carefully approaching with the plate in hand. Lee slowly poured all the food into the toilet. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. He nervously muttered, wondering if they would really come out to eat. As the vegetable leaves settled in the bowl, Lee took a deep breath, holding it in anticipation. The water's surface began to ripple. From the toilet walls, the creatures started extending their pitch-black tentacles toward the vegetables. And they truly emerged, grotesque beings with writhing black tentacles, glossy like tar, with a texture resembling rotten flesh or massive parasites. The surface of the tentacles was covered in pale brown bulging eyes, looking like sensory organs or parasitic sacs. Some tentacle ends opened into mouths with teeth or suction tubes, and some bore long, twisted tongues like parasitic worms. Lee stood and watched them devour the food ravenously. He was horrified, yet there was a gleam of excitement in his eyes. Lee licked his lips lightly, wearing a cunning smile. A revenge plan to soothe his earlier rage was about to unfold. He eagerly opened the fridge, bringing everything edible into the bathroom. Then he continuously dumped plate after plate of food into the toilet, from stir-fried meat to a full plate of curry and even a bowl of white rice, until the toilet was overflowing with food. It was as if he was treating the creature to a grand feast. Watching it greedily extend its small mouths and devour everything in the bowl, Lee gleefully popped a piece of meat into his mouth, chewing with smug satisfaction at his plan. Thanks to the food Lee provided, the strange creature grew rapidly. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded several times in size. It became greedier, extending its tentacles, demanding more food. Seeing this, Lee excitedly brought in more food for it. It seemed to be growing faster than he had imagined. By now, the creature had become much larger and greedier. Its big mouth, full of sharp teeth, suddenly lunged up to snatch the food. As it lunged toward him, Lee was startled to realize that the monster had become more aggressive. However, he felt that his revenge plan was nearly complete. Looking at the creature in the toilet, he thought this was enough. The monster still lingered, seemingly waiting for Lee to bring it more food. Its rough tentacles swayed, ready to consume anything. Still, he decided to stop and wait for his roommate to return, partly because if it grew any larger and more aggressive, he feared he wouldn't be able to control it. Then Lee closed the toilet lid, locking it inside. With the lid shut, it looked perfectly harmless. After finishing everything, Lee smirked. His cruel revenge plan was about to begin. As the golden rays of sunset fell upon the apartment wall, Lee's roommate Zhang returned home. He opened the door, unaware of what was about to happen, but the scene before him caught him by surprise. Lee, his roommate, the same one he had irritated that morning, was preparing food waiting for him. Upon seeing Zhang, Lee greeted him cheerfully. Then he warmly handed over a prepared food box to Zhang, apologizing for being a bit hot-tempered that morning and saying he wanted to make up for it with some braised ribs, Zhang's favorite. Zhang seemed to find it hard to believe. Lee even added that Zhang should eat it and not throw it into the toilet again. True to his rude nature, Zhang not only failed to appreciate Lee's kindness, but deliberately took the food box to the bathroom, intending to dump it there just to provoke Lee further. At that moment, Zhang had fallen into Lee's trap. He reached out to lift the toilet lid, preparing to dump the food. Zhang's jaw dropped, and his eyes widened in horror at the sight before him. From the toilet, a horrifying, slimy monster lunged out. It opened its massive mouth filled with sharp teeth and bit into Zhang. The monster clung tightly to Zhang. His face and body were covered in slimy black tentacles, as if he were about to be devoured. Zhang screamed in panic. Lee stood at the bathroom door, immensely satisfied with the scene before him. He curled his lips into a sneer, relishing the fate of the rude one. Ignoring Zhang's agonized screams, Lee coldly turned away, not forgetting to pull the door shut behind him. He finally felt a weight lift from his chest. Zhang writhed in pain, continuously screaming. The black, slimy tentacles, covered in spikes and pustules, wrapped around almost his entire body. Some even crawled into his mouth, eyes, and ears. By now, Zhang's screams had weakened to faint gasps. His last words of regret barely escaped his lips before his body was completely absorbed by the monster. Standing outside the bathroom door, Lee heard every last word from Zhang's former roommate. He let out a soft chuckle. At last, he wouldn't have to live with that filthy, rude guy anymore. Once the room fell silent and everything seemed to return to normal, Lee finally felt at ease and left. However, he had no idea that by absorbing Zhang, the monster had grown to an unimaginable size. It began stretching its tentacles through the bathroom door crevices, trying to escape. The fate of the rude one was indeed terrifying. But those who scheme to harm others will also face consequences.